Welcome, listeners, to our next edition of Coffee with Kev, podcast run by myself, Chris Lawler, CEO of Learn International. We're a small boutique provider based in Ireland and offering programming in Europe, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia. But we're not here to talk about us. We're here to talk with our next participant, who is Dr. Ryan Dye, who is the Director of Education Abroad at Miami University. Welcome.
Good to be here, Chris.
Thank you so much. I mean, here, there, we're in this virtual
Right.
space.
What is here?
Exactly, yeah. How are things there? First and foremost, the most important question is, will Liverpool get the title this year?
They darn well better get the title, Chris.
Do they deserve it right now?
They deserve it right now. They have an insurmountable lead. They are effectively two wins away from winning the title. It's an inevitability. It's been 30 years, and I'm telling you, if they void this season, there'll be riots in Merseyside. So
I think that it sounds like there'll be riots in Oxford as well.
There will be.
One small localized one within your house.
Correct. I would say Liverpool not getting the title would be as devastating as anything to come out of this crisis for me.
Oh my God. I feel for you, Yeah.
But
it
looks like they're going to get back at it. Fingers crossed. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe behind closed doors, who knows what's going to happen. But I mean, I can't imagine they're not going to win it. But technically, they could lose it.
Technically, they could lose it.
That's all I'm saying. We'll leave it at that.
Technically, they could lose it.
So, what was it like moving from a smaller Iowa-based institution, having been there pretty much from when you finished your PhD, going into this huge public institution in Ohio? What was that like for you?
The level of complexity was elevated pretty significantly. At a small institution, I essentially built a lot of our processes and procedures. I knew the key players by name. I knew how to get things done. Then you move to a large state institution where there's a long history of getting things going in a certain way. And you have to learn who the players are. You have to learn how things are done. And the only way to do that is to just learn by doing. And so it's been a year of asking a lot of questions and trying to put the pieces together in my mind. It's been exhausting, quite frankly. It takes a lot of mental energy, especially when you get into your 40s and beyond, to learn new ways of doing things. But I'm glad that I made the move when I made the move, because I feel like I still have the energy and the drive to take on the challenge.
No better man. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. So for the listeners, St. Ambrose University in Davenport was your former institution. Mm-hmm. And why did you come to study abroad? What was it that really kind of attracted you to that area? Because I know your PhD is in the area of history. You started the Irish Studies program there, and you were coordinator for Middle East Institute and various different things. And then suddenly, boom, Director of International Education. How did that happen?
Well, at St. Ambrose, I was hired as a history professor, and I taught for about 7 years, many sections of the United States History Survey, as well as British history, Irish history, colonial America, revolutionary America, Middle Eastern history. I taught a lot of history classes and had a great time doing it. I really enjoyed being in the classroom and being part of the educational enterprise. And as part of that, I led study abroad programs, short-term faculty-led programs, particularly to the UK and the Middle East. And when my predecessor left St. Ambrose, they asked me to fill in on a temporary basis. And one thing led to another. And it became a full-time gig in which I was doing both teaching as well as serving as director of the International Education Office. And as I became more adept at being an SIO at St. Ambrose, my teaching duties were diminished to the point that by the end I was really a full-time SIO. And as an SIO, you are involved in everything. You're involved in the international student side as well as the education abroad side. You're involved with partnerships. It was a great learning experience. And by the end, I was a forum certified education abroad professional, and really felt like that was my passion because of my educational background. The fact that I had been a faculty member for so long, was really interested in teaching and helping students to grow and to learn. And I felt like the area of education abroad really cultivated that in me, and it was an area that I wanted to grow in. And so I was looking for a bigger place, a place that would challenge me in the education abroad area, and the Miami University job came open, and I was fortunate enough to get it.
Yeah, and the rest is history. Well, at least the last year and a bit is. That's I was interesting because last week I was chatting to Liz Dilly down in USC Aiken, and she made the same jump from a small private into at least from her perspective, a large state institution or a campus of a large state institution. And she echoed what you were saying, where to a certain extent there's maybe slightly more day-to-day politics in terms of getting things done, and slightly more bureaucratic. Things happen slower, even to the point she was talking about, if she's working with providers, sometimes, you might get paid in a month, or you might get paid in 6 months. And I actually can't tell you. All I know is it's left this desk and it's gone to that desk, and that's the way it is. And, it's interesting to see that. And I'm sure, there are positives relative to the size of the institution and how well developed the office is. But I suppose there are also other things that you have to get used to. So tell us the situation in Miami University at the moment in relation to the crisis that we're going through. What was it like? I mean, you would have been probably about a year, just before a year, just less than a year in the role, and then suddenly, I'm assuming this is certainly one of the largest, if not the largest, crisis that the university has come into, particularly in terms of international education. So can you talk us through what that looked like for you?
Well, I began in Miami in February 2019, and so coronavirus started to hit around January 2020, and spread from Asia into Europe. And in February 2020, I started to get a lot of nervous phone calls from parents of Miami students abroad in Europe, as well as some anxious emails from students worrying about getting trapped in Europe, that they would not be able to fly home. And we were following the guidelines of the Department of State and the CDC, among others. And for the longest time there, Europe remained at a level 2. We were tracking the situation closely, but there didn't seem to be any reason to pull our students in Europe back. And then we moved into March, and by early March, the situation in northern Italy was quite serious. It was getting more serious in Spain. And so we began to have more serious conversations about contingencies for our students. And then March 11th hit. And I remember I was at dinner with a couple of colleagues from our study abroad program in Luxembourg. And we had a nice meal. I came home, and when I entered the door, my wife said, "You have to see President Trump's speech." The speech implied that travel from Europe to the U.S. was going to be severely curtailed. It wasn't until a little bit later that we got the details that this was primarily directed toward non-U.S. citizens. But the writing was on the wall that travel from Europe to the U.S. was going to begin to become more challenging. And so within, I'd say, 15 minutes of getting, of learning about President Trump's speech, I was on the line with my boss, the assistant provost for global initiatives at Miami. And I also contacted the provost, who got in touch with the president. We got in touch with the general counsel, and we essentially conducted all-nighter. We created a war room in our office space at Miami, and just spent the night plotting out our communication plan and our refund policies for students on Miami programs abroad. And by the next morning, we began to communicate with our students on Miami programs abroad. We then reached out to students on non-Miami programs and began the process of urging them to come home as soon as it was feasible. And from that point forward, it's just been a constant communication. First, it was tracking students to make sure they got home safely. And then we've been spending weeks and weeks working through the refunds of housing, any other recoverable costs. For Miami students, we also paid for any travel change fees that they incurred. You know, I'm pleased to say we moved quickly to, we did not hesitate to refund what needed to be refunded to our students abroad. And as a result, our response to the crisis, I'm pleased to say, has been generally quite well received by Miami students and parents. But it's been a stressful time. I would say that there was some measure of relief when March 11th hit, and we had to make a decision. And we started to pull students home. The previous 3, 4, 5 weeks, when we just had this daily deluge of questions, calls from anxious parents and students, that was frankly more stressful than getting onto the task of bringing them home.
How did your staff deal with that, and how did you deal with, you know, prepping your team to be able to manage in a crisis situation? Well, I mean, no doubt that there is, you know, CPD, risk and crisis management, but you know, maybe that's more focused on the ground types of things. So, how did you manage your staff within the office to say, okay, this is what's coming, and this is how we're going to deal with it?
Fortunately, we have a strong culture at Miami of risk management. And we have a culture of working through issues to resolution and communicating quite creatively and quickly with our key stakeholders to get things done. And so there wasn't a radical change. I just think the volume of issues we had to address and the number of calls that we had to make, it increased. So just our workload increased, but in terms of our approach and what we had to do, that didn't change too terribly much. I think we knew quite quickly the gravity of the situation, and it was all hands on deck. We had a massive Google spreadsheet with all of our students and on all of our programs, and we were tracking them, and we divided up the students, and we were responsible for tracking them from their program back home, confirming that they had gotten back home. We worked together on various pieces of communication that had to go out to students and their loved ones. I've been really proud of my staff. They've done a phenomenal job because not only have we had to deal with this unprecedented crisis, but for the most part, we've had to deal with this unprecedented crisis from home. So we haven't even been together to meet and to hash things out in person. And so doing it from home while you're dealing with your responsibilities at home and in a very unique situation and dealing with just the daily grind of working in this fashion, it makes things even more challenging.
Yeah, it does. I think one of the things I mentioned in a couple of the podcasts, I think one of the things that I find really heartening is, generally speaking, I think, certainly here in Europe and in Ireland, there is way more of a flexibility on an individual basis where people are understanding of and don't expect the same crisp cut, I not want to say professional service, but that flow of service that one would expect from a service provider or from an office, or those types of things, whereby they understand that people are working from home, and the 2-year-old has just fallen over and vomited up the cereal, and all of these types of things, and it needs to happen. But it's just life, and people are getting on with it, and I have to say I'm kind of embracing and liking the increased informality of it. I'm here in my cardigan, sitting on the couch, so and I make no apology for it. I have my cow over my shoulder, and all is well. But I think, well, jest, obviously all is not well, but I think that the thing that I find I take a lot of heart from is that that hashtag "we're all in this together." I really feel that people are living that. They really are. There's a lot of backup and those types of things, and it sounds like your team have got that too, which is great. Tell me a little bit about what you see happening now. What's going to happen in the immediate?
Well, I think that this summer is a wash. I think nearly all programs have been canceled or will be canceled. You're seeing a huge push towards virtual study abroad and virtual internships to try to fill the gaps there. And I do think that virtual study abroad, virtual exchange, virtual internships are here to stay. It's long overdue. They should have been, I think, a higher priority long before now. I'd say fall study abroad is, it's hard to imagine. We are still going forward and planning for our fall Luxembourg program, for example. We've shrunk the program to 89 days to avoid a visa process. And I think most providers that are still offering fall programs have gone to an 89-day calendar. There are a lot of question marks about the fall in terms of travel. Will students be able to travel freely? What kinds of quarantine requirements will be in place? Logistically, it's going to be a challenge. And the backdrop to all of it is that institutions, as well as providers, cannot afford to have a repeat of March and April, when we were bringing back hundreds of students and issuing thousands of dollars of refunds. We can't have a repeat of that, which I think is probably going to be the deciding factor when it comes to fall. Do we have the stomach to go forward based on our risk assessment? So we're playing the long game. We're trying to buy ourselves time before making a decision. We're considering all contingencies. We're going to be drafting very detailed refund policies. But it's not going to be a normal fall, if there's a fall at all. I think for us and for many institutions, winter is when things get really interesting, because financially, it's crucial for us and probably for many universities and organizations. That is when we send out a lot of students on faculty-led programs and collect the fees and tuition from those. Winter is a growing term in terms of study abroad. And my concern is that if winter is curtailed or cut entirely, that this could be catastrophic for my office, as well as for many providers. I think we're all holding out hope that by spring things will be great, or a lot better. I hope so too. It really depends on science, I guess. You know, how far along are we with a vaccine? How far along are we with drugs that mitigate the harshest effects of the virus? So we'll just have to wait and see on that.
We could always go back to the bleach idea. Just saying.
Right.
Don't do that, folks.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah. It's interesting you should mention the winter thing. You know, it's you know, as a provider ourselves, obviously you're picking up the phone and you're talking to friends in the industry and those types of things. And, in a lot of we're a smaller boutique provider, but then there's obviously the big hundreds and hundreds of folks that hearing about the damage that's going on with them, and taking a little bit of solace personally ourselves from an international perspective, that everybody is in the same boot. You know, just before we started recording, you were saying, you know, how it is kind of a great leveler. Everybody is feeling the hurt. It doesn't matter the size of the organization, because it's relative to your overhead and various different things. And yeah, we were looking at it too, and it's kind of, I think most people are from a provider perspective, are essentially writing off 2020 and looking to winter as the when we prime the engine again, you know, to restart and those types of things. But yes, I would imagine that come September, October, November, you're going to see some, certainly providers that I think will be really, really hurting at this stage, and will look like different businesses and those types of things. And I think it's prudent for us to ensure that we don't go out the other side of COVID the same as we went in. It's really important, assuming that we do go out the other side of COVID, you know, because that's the reality of the situation for everybody involved, I think. And I agree with you. I think if winter and spring next year are are a washout again, then the whole industry will definitely look very different.
Yeah,
And so we will just see, where it goes. Can I go on a complete and utter tangent here for a minute?
sure,
You
sure.
mentioned you did when you before you were when you were leaving St. Ambrose, then you were on your way to Miami, or even before you were on your way to Miami, you did the forum certification.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's great. I'm heavily involved with the forums certification program. I did it myself. I believe that there are 65 of us or so who have done the certification program. It's pretty intensive. You do a series of modules, workshops, um, in person. Typically, you do them in person, and then you complete a series of assignments that are reviewed, and it usually takes multiple drafts before it's deemed acceptable, and you move on to the next topic. Um,
That's
I
not just you, no.
not just me. I don't think so. Actually, actually, I know that for a fact because now I am an assessor in the certification,
Oh, okay.
actually doing the
Okay.
grading. Uh,
Right.
and I know for a fact that we do issue many revise and resubmits.
Hmm.
Um, I'm also part of the team that is writing the curriculum, the certification workshop curriculum for the 6th edition of the standards, which is coming out.
When is
Uh,
that happening?
and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's to be a teacher again.
Yeah, well, that's another thing I wanted to ask you about because you spoke so fondly of your teaching at St. Ambrose. How do you kind of scratch that itch now?
I get really excited in thinking about program design when it comes to faculty-led programs and working with faculty to design programs that achieve exciting, interesting learning outcomes. Training, so I do a lot of faculty training. And so instead of teaching 20-year-olds, I'm teaching faculty, and that presents its own set of
Yeah.
challenges. You're teaching people who aren't used to being taught,
Hmm.
and so it takes a sort of a softer touch. I'd say you have to be very respectful. You have to be a very good listener. You have to be very patient. Um, but usually they appreciate what you're trying to do for them. The thing I spend the most time on with faculty has to do with risk management training, which is extremely important for faculty-led program directors, that they have a clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities in the area of risk management and Miami's policies and procedures.
5 things that a prospective faculty member should be thinking about from the point of view of mitigating risk when they're developing a program.
I
Or
would,
3 things, top 3 things.
well, I would say that they have to be very mindful of financial risk as they consider the provider they work with. How much will their program fee be? When are their payment deadlines? Are they going to have to pay a lot of money very early and expose the university to financial risks? So there are a series of financial questions that we want to make sure that are answered satisfactorily. As they design their program, they need to be mindful of Department of State and the International SOS travel risk advisories. If they are planning to do a program in a level 3 country, or or in a state in Mexico, for example, that is at level 3 or 4, even though Mexico as a country is at level 2, that's a no-go for us. So we want to catch that early and make sure that they've thought through where they are going with students, because it may be a place that they went to in the past that they think is fantastic. But we just, from a risk management perspective, will not take students there. So for example, Guadalajara, Mexico, lovely city. I really enjoy going to Guadalajara, but it's in the state of Jalisco, which is a level 3. And so we simply cannot take students there at this point in time. So there are those risk levels. There are the financial pieces, and finally, and we spend a lot of time about this in training. We just have to get them to appreciate that they are on duty 24/7. That this is far more time consuming and all consuming than teaching a class back in the States. They have to be, in a sense, an RA, a psychologist, kind of a nurse in some cases in terms of providing basic medical attention. They have Title IX responsibilities, Clery Act responsibilities, and they just have to be constantly vigilant in assessing how students are doing physically, emotionally, etc.
Yeah, I really like that, how it's time consuming and all consuming. I'm going to borrow that, because when we start to talk about to faculty, when we're invited by my partners to do so, the very first question that I ask is, have they led a group overseas before, and if so, have they been to the place that they're proposing to go to? Because those two things will give you a base of knowledge, or at least an assumed base of knowledge, from which you can work, and then you can kind of piece the jigsaw together to understand as a provider what you need to, where you need support and where you don't, and those types of things, where you need to back off sometimes because my program, that's it, these types of things. So no, that's really interesting. Wasn't really intending talking about faculty-led development, but I'm glad that we were able to do it. Now, swaying back across to COVID-19, one of the things that we're doing it with this podcast is, this is the director's cut, so speaking to the likes of yourself, but then we're also speaking to faculty, and we're speaking to students as well. And the whole purpose of it is to provide a kind of a positive in a world of uncertainty, and not to disregard the fact that there's really horrible things going on in the world at the moment related to COVID and beyond that. But to accept that and then say that the purpose of this podcast is to look from an international education sector point of view. What is the silver lining? What are the benefits that we can see as a sector? Are there any? What is the positive? How do we take a positive from this, or can we move towards something that will ultimately be a positive, based on the challenges that COVID has manifested on individual campuses and within organizations and things? So from your perspective at Miami University, what's the silver lining?
I'd say one silver lining is the recognition of how much you can get done well remotely. I think this is, I hope that this is a game changer when it comes to remote work. Speaking about Miami, Miami's located in a small town in Southwest Ohio. We are about 45, 50 minutes from Cincinnati. We have faculty and staff who live in Oxford, all the way out to Cincinnati and beyond. And I do think it's a challenge for schools like Miami when it comes to retention of staff. The commute, if you are a city person and you want to live in Cincinnati, for example, the prospect of making a commute to Miami 5 days a week can get quite daunting. Whereas if you were given the opportunity to work remotely a day or two a week, it may be a game changer in terms of retaining a staff person. So as somebody who originally lived in Cincinnati, I don't live there now, I live in Oxford now, but it certainly would be a game changer for me personally. And I think it would really help us when it comes to recruiting and retaining staff. So I hope from a remote work standpoint, this is a game changer. As I said before, I think in terms of virtual exchange, it's really drawn attention to that area. I've been a very active supporter of COIL for several years now, Collaborative Online International Learning. And I would say that although it's been a growing area, there's still been a lot of general ignorance about it, or it just hasn't been made a priority on many offices and many campuses. And now it's all we're talking about is remote learning, online learning, virtual learning. And from my perspective, from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, with the goal of achieving 100% internationalization, in which every student is given a viable opportunity to have an international experience. You can't get to 100% without some sort of virtual international program. We're one of the largest senders in our category in the US. We send, we're usually in the top 5. We send thousands of students abroad every year, but even still, less than half of our undergraduates study abroad. They can't afford it. They have commitments, responsibilities that preclude them from traveling. What are we doing for this very large percentage of students to give them the international experience that we know they need and deserve? We have to design virtual exchanges, virtual study abroad, virtual internship opportunities to fill that gap.
That's what's happening at Miami now, or you're starting down that road. What I find when I've talked to a couple of other folks on the podcast, that everybody is aware of this now. Probably they were aware of it, but it was in a further distant kind of a closet in the back of the mind someplace. And now it's kind of moved forward, and they're way more aware of it, and it's way more pressing in terms of institutional priority. And I think I agree, there's that general level of ignorance as to, I know what it is, but I don't no idea how to implement it. I don't know really, if you started to grill me, I couldn't really talk you through it, other than there's somebody sitting here and there's somebody sitting there, and they're in 2 different countries, and let's see where we go from there, So what stage is Miami at, and what are your plans?
We're at a very early stage. Ironically, the last trip I took pre-COVID was to Florida International University, where they held a 3-day COIL workshop. And Miami took a team of 3. I was part of that team of 3 that participated in this workshop. And the purpose of the workshop was to develop a strategic plan for introducing COIL to the university. And so I've drafted a memo and sent it up the chain of command, and it's currently under review. but it's my hope and expectation that we will be able to move quite quickly in this area. I can say that in my space in education abroad, we've created a new program group in Teradata called virtual study abroad. We're seeing that program providers are starting to add to the directory their virtual internships and study abroad programs. We have to figure out how to advise these students. We have to figure out how to vet good virtual study abroad programs from those that are not so great. So we have a lot more work to do in that space, along with doing all that we can to provide resources for our faculty to design faculty-led programs that are either hybrid, meaning some travel, some virtual, or that are completely virtual and that use COIL to deliver an international experience for students. And I do think this is a silver lining, right? If you have faculty who've been leading programs and maybe their program has gotten tired, maybe enrollment's down, this could be an injection of energy and creativity that the program needs. Maybe they want to travel to some place that is risky, not only due to COVID, but due to other factors. This is a way for them to run their program. So I'm hopeful that the virtual space will enable us to work with faculty in a lot more creative ways. I do get concerned that faculty believe that the only way they can internationalize is by leading a study abroad program, a travel program. And that's just not the case. There are a lot of ways to achieve the learning outcomes that you want to achieve that don't involve charging students $8,000 to travel over the winter break, for example.
I wonder, that therein lies one of the issues, I think, where, faculty are king, queen, and everything else when it comes to developing faculty-led, which is one of the big mechanisms of pushing larger numbers out and getting a quasi-affordable and deliverable experience that fits within the calendar and fits within the boundaries around which students have, be it availability or cost program or those types of things. And so, there's this motivating factor for the faculty, which is I'm going to Rome for 2 weeks, or I'm going to Jordan, or those types of things. And so I'm physically going to be there. And so I get this payout, not financial or maybe financial, but I get this payout in terms of the experience myself, even though I'm minding the students and I'm delivering a course. Mm-hmm. Whereas virtual, I'm doing all the work, but I'm not going to be there, Mm-hmm. And so trying to balance out the motivating factors for the faculty to be involved in that. I agree with you, and I think definitely the virtual space is going to touch traditionally underrepresented groups, even lifelong learners and those types of things. And I'm really excited about it, and we're pivoting that way as we speak, as I'm sure everybody else is. And but at the end of the day, it's that you need that faculty to buy in to it. So how do you do that? Give us some gold. Tell us. Lead us.
Wow, that's a great question, Chris. I think that there are many faculty who you will not convince mm-hmm. to drop their travel program or to change their travel program. What you hope to do is to build the infrastructure institutionally, organizationally, and that's what we're hopefully going to do in Miami, where you have some champions who know how virtual study abroad works, know the best practices of it. You devote some resources to incentivize the development of COIL courses, so faculty development grants, things along those lines. And you gradually build a culture where this is seen as beneficial to one's, for example, promotion and tenure prospects. As I said, you put some money behind it. There are attractive grants that faculty can apply for. You achieve some successes. So you develop a few of these COIL programs. They go really, really well, hopefully, because you provided them with the support and guidance that they need. And they join your roster of COIL champions who can spread the gospel to more faculty. And I think that's how it gets done. But it needs to start with an organizational commitment of personnel and resources to building COIL at your institution. You just can't tell faculty, well, this is a really good idea from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And isn't this a great model? Look at the learning outcomes you can achieve. Because as you said, there are a lot of incentives for them to keep doing things the way they're doing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's clear and concise, and it's not something. It has to be a concerted institutional effort. It's not going to happen by mistake or by
no way.
We have to shift it from a situation whereby it is happening in most institutions, but on an individual faculty in organization A to faculty in organization B basis, and trying to pull all of these people together and formulate a decipherable and logical policy that's well resourced is a challenge, I would imagine. But you know what? I agree with you. It is a silver lining because it's high time it's happened, and now we have the catalyst here for us to do it. And I think, we think as Learn International, our mantra now is like, we're not the same on the other side of this. And if we are, it's a fail. It's a total fail. And I think everybody should be thinking the same thing. We're not just going to sit and restart what we had before. Yes, that's going to happen, but we're also going to have other strings to our bow, and we're going to be a better organization at the end of it. So I think that's good. What kind of superhero would you be?
I would love the ability to work at the highest possible level without sleep. It would be nice to just be able to keep going, because there's just not enough time in the day to do all that needs to be done, especially now.
So how do you stay positive then? Localized in and around COVID-19, how do you personally stay positive? I mean, I've never seen you not positive, so maybe that's just your default setting, but everybody's got those times where you're kind of going, oh, I had enough of this.
I do think you have to try to find the silver lining. So I appreciate your questions about that. I try to set a lot of goals. So goals for the day, goals for the week. One of the things I've enjoyed about this crisis is that it has really forced me to pay even more attention to human resources and to staying connected to my staff, and that's good. That's good therapy for me as well. Talking to staff, talking to friends as well, family. So I'm trying to be more conscious of that and not take it for granted. So yeah, I would say goal setting and prioritizing human connection.
Oh, that's good. I like it. That's a good answer. Last question. What is the first thing that you will eat that you can't eat right now?
I'm gonna answer this like the good Cincinnati
I know
resident
what's coming.
that I am going to say Skyline Chili,
Yes,
um,
yes.
followed by Grater's Ice Cream, uh,
Mhm.
followed by a pint of beer at one of Cincinnati's many microbreweries.
And we would like to congratulate you on your new directorship of Cincinnati Tourism Board. And no, that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good. I was thinking about Skyline, and since I've been going to Cincinnati, which is about 2 or 3 years or whatever, I don't know how many people have every time I go there, they assume it's the first time I've been there. And they say, "Have you heard of this Skyline?" And it's great stuff. I love the raw onions they put. Oh,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
hungry now. Yeah. So anyway, look, thank you so much for chatting with us, being so open about what's happening with yourself and with Miami. And again, for the listeners out there, the idea of this is to spark some conversation. We're not changing macro political pieces within international education. We're literally just people talking and chatting informally about what's happening in COVID and where we think it's going. So if you have your own opinions or questions or things like that, please do reach out to us. If you'd like to be on the podcast, we'd be happy to hear your thoughts and to chat with you. But for now, this has been another Coffee with Cow podcast with myself, Chris Lawler, and with Dr. Ryan Dye from Miami University. Thanks very much for being with us. Tune in again next week when we'll have somebody else from somewhere else in international education talking about what their feelings are in relation to COVID-19. So until then, stay inside, stay safe, and be kind to each other.